back, dear viewers. You're still watching The Breakfast Show live on Nile TV International. It's now time for our first topic of discussion for today, and we're going to be discussing the historic bilateral ties between Egypt and India as India marks its 70th anniversary of its day. And to shed more light on this topic, we're most delighted to be joined here in the studio by Ambassador Mohamed Shazly, and he's a former assistant foreign minister. First of all, good morning, sir, and thank you so much for joining.
Good morning to you.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. And of course, India has become a fast-growing major economy, and its technological services and advances in both the health and technology fields are very clear. So would you tell us more about the changes that took place in India, and how did they start and evolve by time?
Let me first of all congratulate the Indian people on their 70th anniversary of independence. Egypt and India have always had very warm relations. At the time of the struggle for independence, the Egyptian people were standing closely behind the Indians. We are talking about the 1920s and the 1930s. At this time, Egypt was also under the British occupation. At this time, the top Egyptian artists like Ahmed Shawqi, for instance, the poet, he wrote a great poem about Mahatma Gandhi. Also, Abbas Mahmoud al-Aqad, he also wrote a book, Salama Musa, Fathi Radwan. This shows that the Egyptians and the Indians have always been on very strong relations, not only on the governmental level, but on the popular level. India, during those 70 years, has achieved great advances, primarily because they concentrated on science and technology, and they saw this as the fomenter of progress. And to give an example, this week the Indians have launched the Chandrayaan spaceship, which succeeded in orbiting the moon. Unfortunately, a lunar orbiter failed to land on the surface of the moon. But this in no way diminishes the importance of the achievement, especially that this is the second time that India sends a spaceship to orbit the moon. Chandrayaan 1 in 2008 and Chandrayaan 2 this month. India has a spaceship orbiting Mars. These are tremendous technological and scientific achievements. India is also planning to send a space station to permanently orbit Earth and have experiments, scientific experiments. So this shows, what the Indian scientific prowess is like. The Indians have institutionalized their efforts. It is not just, a few scientists working randomly together. No, there are institutions. It started, for instance, its interest in space and its experimentation in space since 1962, when the Indian National Research Committee on Space, which was transformed in 1969 into what today is ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization. Institutions are very important for the continuity of the work. We have learned a lesson from the United States when 1961 President Kennedy said that the United States is going to put a man on the moon before the end of the decade. In 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated. The program did not die because there was an institution, NASA, which carried on the research and carried on the work until the object was achieved. The same thing with India. The last spaceship was unfortunately lost 2 days ago. But I'm sure that with the prowess, with the institution and the institutional work, they will succeed in that.
Yes, sorry to cut you off.
On the other hand, I mean, India does not, is not only working in the field of space. India is also a participant in a very ambitious international program, which is called ITER, International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, which is working on fusion as a source of clean and cheap energy. This is a program which I think there are 14 countries participating in, because it's a very expensive and ambitious program. It has a budget of about 50 billion euros. And the participants are the European Union, the United States, Russia, China, South Korea. The ITER has given India a major part of the reactor to build. And this reflects the trust, the international trust in Indian science and Indian technology. If you look at what India has achieved through science and technology, they have their nuclear arsenal, they have their missile forces, they have built an aircraft carrier, they have built nuclear submarines. All of this has made India a major player in the international arena, politically, economically, scientifically. This is the result of investment in science and technology. India today is the largest producer of agricultural tractors.
Yes. Ambassador, allow us just to go for a short break and then be back to resume our talk. Dear viewers, a short break and then be back to resume this segment in this edition of The Breakfast Show.
مصر بتسلم عليكو، مصر بتناديكو بتناديكو، مصر ايدنا بايديكو نعمل معجزات، مصر فاتحة لكم ايديها كله يتراهن عليها، مصر تاني هتبني الأهرامات. It's the land of inspiration and the cradle of civilization. Egypt is the great gift of the Nile. With more work and dedication, and with the people's love
back, dear viewers. You're still watching the Breakfast Show live on Nile TV International, and we're still continuing our discussion about the Egyptian-Indian bilateral ties and the of India towards development, and we're continuing our discussion with our guest here in the studio, Ambassador Mohamed Shazly, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Sir, before going to the break, you were talking about the achievements of the Indian people in different domains.
Indeed, what I'm trying to portray is how investment in science and technology leads to the success of the nation. As I was saying, that we are celebrating the 70th anniversary of the independence of India. Before India's independence, the news coming from India was usually about catastrophes, famine, plagues, natural disasters, and there was hardly any achievement coming out of India. After independence, India started to take an independent role from its ex-colonial masters who have depleted and exploited its wealth, and they started to take an independent role. And at that time, we must also remember that India and Egypt were hand in hand in forming the non-aligned movement, which President Abdel Nasser and Jawaharlal Nehru were instrumental in this movement. And also, still at that time, India was not a big power, and it had tremendous cases to tackle, a very large growing population, production was not big. So they had to handle this, and they chose to handle this through science and technology, and raising the standard of the Indian people by education, by scientific research, in order to transform India from a third world nation into I wouldn't say a superpower yet, but I would say a big and major power on the international arena.
Mr. Ambassador, if we move on to India's foreign policy, how do you see its strategic relations with world countries and specifically with Egypt?
I think that relations with Egypt are very warm relations. We have maintained historically a very close relationship with India. At the moment, I have some worries about India with the crisis that is escalating in Kashmir, which threatens the stability and security in the sub-Indian continent. And I think this is a very serious challenge, because you cannot have progress, you cannot have affluence, you can't have development without stability. So I hope that wisdom will prevail, and that this very serious problem will be solved without subjecting the Indians to any traumas, especially if we take into consideration that have been already 3 wars between India and Pakistan in the past.
Yes. Ambassador, your wrapping up comments, please.
As I said, you know, I was, and I thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak a major scientific and technological achievement that has been achieved this week, the Indian lunar expedition, which unfortunately did not get enough media attention in our country. And I think the Indian experience in science and technology and how it has pushed forward India is an experiment that we should put light on and study carefully.
Sir, we cannot talk about India and do not mention its cultural aspect, and specifically with regards to Indian movies and art and architecture.
That is also a very important issue because, you know, culture is really what makes a person. If you have a healthy culture, you get a healthy community. The Indian movies also have stepped gigantic steps forward in terms of quantity and quality. The number of Indian films, I think India is number one now in the number of films that they produced in India, and the quality also is, they produce some great films. Culturally speaking, let me also raise a very important aspect which I believe India and Egypt should cooperate in. There is also now a strong campaign in India to recover its archaeological and artifacts that have been taken by the imperialist countries when they invaded India. And Egypt also is trying very hard to regain some of its looted culture, especially the Rosetta Stone and the head of Nefertiti. And I think this is an aspect where India and Egypt can cooperate to get what really belongs to them.
Right. Well, Ambassador Mohamed Shazly, the former assistant to the foreign minister, many thanks for your insight and for your presence, sir.
Thank you very much.
And dear viewers, now we move on to a report by Nile TV's very own Dina Yunus, and then we'll be back to resume our segments on The Breakfast Show.
There was a belief concerning the siblings' marriages of the kings of ancient Egypt, built on the